Welcome back to our history show here on Uxbridge FM, and local historian Ken Pearce is back, and we have another talk from him, this time about, very topical, World War II and VE Day. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to begin by telling you about my constant companion throughout the Second World War, and that was my gas mask. They were issued in September 1938. That's actually a year before the war began. And already in existence was the Air Raid Precautions Service. So two of those wardens came round to my infant school to issue us with our gas masks. There were three sizes: small, medium, and large. And I was a medium. But I do remember thinking at the time that the couple of children in my class who had a large size gas mask must have bigger brains than me. Straps were adjusted to make sure they were a close fit. A few weeks later, stout cardboard boxes were issued to make the storage of the gas masks easier. By the time war came, I was a pupil at Whitehall Junior School in Cowley Road, Uxbridge. And of course, then we had to carry our gas masks everywhere. Some years ago, the headmaster of Whitehall allowed me to borrow the school logbook kept during the war by Charles Pentney, the headmaster. And I discovered on the 29th of April 1941, he wrote, "Uxbridge Council mobile gas van visited the school, and 320 children passed through the chamber for a gas mask test." Well, I was there, and I remember what happened. A lorry pulled into the playground, pulling a trailer, which was in fact a small room on wheels. And groups of us children were led into this little room. The doors were shut, and we were told to put our gas masks on. Then we were given a talk to remind us to carry our gas masks wherever we went and to make sure that they were not damaged in any way. We were then asked to take the gas masks off. Oh my word! Our eyes began to sting and tears streamed down our cheeks, because while that talk had been going on, tear gas had been fed into the little chamber. The doors were at once opened. We all rushed out into the fresh air, and within a short time the effects of the gas had worn off and all was back to normal. No one was harmed in any way, but we certainly had a shock. This was a test of two things. Firstly, to make sure that the gas masks were working properly. And secondly, to make us realise that if there were a gas attack, the mask would indeed save us from harm. In the end, as you know, gas was not used at all, but nevertheless, we were ready. And that's how I managed to have a dose of tear gas. Now we move on to VE Day and happenings, first of all, in this area. Monday the 7th of May, Germans' unconditional surrender. And I wrote in my little pocket diary, "Some flags out already." So it was a great celebration. And the next day, Tuesday the 8th of May, was VE Day, a holiday, of course, for everybody. And in the evening, a service of Thanksgiving was arranged in St. Margaret's Church in the town centre. The place was packed. In fact, there were a lot of people outside in the high street and in the market house, so that the service was relayed to them there. The next day, VE Day +1, was a holiday as well. But at the time, I was living in Wilmar Close, a cul-de-sac of about 30 houses in North Uxbridge. And there, plans were afoot for a street party. Some years ago, I wrote an account And thank goodness, because I've forgotten some of it. But really, this is what happened in Wilmar Close in that period. When the news of the end of the war in Europe reached our street, there was at once a feeling abroad that some suitable celebration should be arranged. So a meeting was called at number 23, the only bungalow in the road, the home of Mrs. Annie Pearce. No relation. Mrs. Pearce was a character. Her language was well spiced with expletives, and I can still picture her, round-shouldered, coughing and smoking her way to and from the shops. There is no doubt, however, that the woman had a heart of gold. At the start of the war, she had organised the knitting of socks, mufflers and balaclava helmets for the troops throughout the district. I also remember, incidentally, her dog, Timmy, who just ran wide and free, but always came back home. And I have a vivid memory of this same animal rushing out of the horse meat shop in the high street, well, just off the high street, with a large bone in its mouth. Whether the dog had been given this titbit or whether he had helped himself, I shall never know, but he got away with it anyway. And yes, some people did eat horse meat in the war, although I think someone bought it for their pets. It's against the nature of the British to eat horse meat. Anyway, the result of the deliberations at the bungalow were that a tea party should be held in the road in the late afternoon of Saturday, the 12th of May, and that a concert would be held in the evening, followed by dancing in the road. A bonfire was not really practicable in those built-up surroundings. So, in those few days that followed, preparations got underway. Where all the food came from in those days of rationing and shortages, I do not know. Perhaps it is not even wise to ask. There were rehearsals for the concert too, and I and a few other teenage boys were asked to dress up in women's clothes and sing a number that was all the rage at the time called My Dreams Are Getting Better All the Time. I must tell you, I didn't like the drag idea at all, but Mrs. Phillips calmed me down and used all her diplomatic skill and cunning to persuade me to go ahead with it. On the great day, which in my memory was sunny and warm, a number of Morrison shelters were dragged out into the street. Morrison shelters were indoor steel shelters, rather shaped like a table. So these were dragged out to form an extremely solid makeshift stage. And on the stage was placed some timber framing and canvas to form the back of the stage, and some curtains were rigged up across the front. My father was among those workers. He was a carpenter, and his skills were put to good use on that occasion. The afternoon began with some simple sports, races in the road and some sort of tug-of-war. But soon there were a row of tables down the centre of the street, and we all sat down to a generous meal. All the houses were decked in Union Jacks and other flags, some stretching right across the road. Meanwhile, Mr. Goodfellow, dressed as an Italian and sporting a wonderful moustache, began dispensing ice cream from a small decorated cart. Ice cream? We hardly knew what it was after those 6 years of privation. In the evening, as it grew dark, the concert got underway. The combined talents of the street provided a variety of entertainment. I only wish I could remember all the items. Certainly, young Robin Goodfellow played the violin, and young Raymond Phillips played the piano. The younger girls did some dancing. Bob Marsh, David Smith, John Payne and I, and possibly one or two others, performed our drag routine. Mrs. Cochrane, who lived just round the corner in Lancaster Road, played the piano and also accompanied Mr. Goodfellow, who had a fine tenor voice. Leslie Marsh, who did impressions, gave a rendering of the story of David and Goliath in the manner of a down-to-earth Welsh preacher, which was most entertaining. So the entertainment proceeded until the national anthem brought the show to a close, The youngsters made their way to bed after a most memorable day, but meanwhile music was relayed and the grown-ups continued singing and dancing well into the night. I don't think we made so much of VJ Day later in the year, and I don't think people have ever been so friendly since. The war brought us together in a way that peace does not. On the other hand, bearing in mind what's happened in recent weeks, you began to wonder. One more thing, that was Saturday the 12th of May in our street party. On the following day, an open-air service was held in the Fastenage Recreation Ground, where a large crowd gathered round the bandstand and the Salvation Army band led the singing. It was a very memorable occasion. I was there and I still have the programme. Well, so much for local celebrations around VE Day period. But I have a very good friend living in Uxbridge who's had a long and fascinating life. Sid Wilson has lived long enough to actually write down his story, and he's given me permission to read a part of it to you today. So this is how Sid Wilson spent VE Day in Holland, serving in the army. Our unit was ordered to go to Rotterdam to set up a prisoner of war camp. The engineers put a pontoon bridge across the River Lek at Arnhem so that we could cross, and we carried on running along the road parallel with the river. Near lunchtime, we stopped the convoy for a brew-up and something to eat, close to a small town. And we suddenly realised that all the people had come out, and they were standing along the other side of the road looking at us. It eventually became clear that they were hungry. They'd been starved by the Germans, who'd gone off with all their food supplies. So we gave them what we had and radioed back to let the authorities know the situation there. And we actually agreed to stay with them to wait for the food to be sent over to us, both for the inhabitants and ourselves. And that first convoy of food arrived 4 hours later. This enabled us to go on to Rotterdam. And as we went along, we kept coming across groups of Germans surrendering to us. So we took all their weapons and told them to march on to Rotterdam. One group of them marched up to us in the charge of an SS officer. He stood them to attention, and because one of his men was a bit late, he went over to the man and slapped him across the face. He then marched up to me, and I told him what I thought of his action. So he spat at me, and he got himself the biggest kick of his life where it hurts most. One of the men spoke English, so I told him that they should all make their way to Rotterdam. And they did arrive later, but without the officer. I've often wondered what happened to him. Well, again, thanks to Sid Wilson for that story of VA Day in different circumstances. And so my talk comes to a close.
Lovely, Ken. And maybe there's time for a reenactment sometime of your drag show and singing My Dream to Getting Better All the Time. What do you think?
No, my voice is broken.